Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of Fun with Flags. I'm your friendly neighborhood soda, joined as always by my partner in crime, 50. How's it going?
I'm fine.
So we're here to discuss the 1972 Summit Series, which is one of the greatest events in Canadian history. It's going to be a truncated show today, just because I'm under the weather. It's late for 50, so it's not going to be a long show. But it's going to be fun to discuss because this is considered the Cold War on ice.
As a nickname.
Sorry, what?
Bless you.
Thank you. No, this is like a really big deal in history because this is when wider hockey audiences just realized how good the Russians were, and the Russians were great. So outside of any time I've mentioned it to you, did you know anything about this?
No, just when you started talking about it.
Have you ever heard about how good the Russian hockey team used to be?
I don't follow sports of any kind. I don't know.
You never know. You never know. So just a little bit of background on it. So it was a series of 8 games that were played between Canada and Russia in 1972. 4 games in Canada, 4 games in Russia. So from the beginning of how long hockey's been on the international stage, which began in 1920, Canada, instead of they wouldn't send professionals, it was amateur teams back then. So it was usually like the previous year's winner of the Allen Cup, which was a prestigious cup at that time in Canada. It was like the champion of Canada. And those teams were often usually university players or unpaid hockey players who would play professionally.
Amateurs, like I said.
It's basically, yeah, it's just like all the other Olympic sports. These teams were often, like I said, university players, unpaid players. From the 1920s into the 50s, the Canadian amateur teams who had won most of the world championships and Olympic titles. So basically for 30 years, Canada dominated. As a career, Canadian players would play instead in various professional hockey leagues, the best reaching the NHL. Their professional status, however, made them ineligible to play in world championships or whatever because they wanted to keep the amateur status and stuff. The first time professionals played hockey in the Olympics was 1998, Nagano. And then the last Canadian team to win the world championship were the Trail Smoke Eaters, which are from BC, in the 1961 championship. And now the Russians, they entered international play in 1954 under the tutelage of a gentleman named Anatoly Tarasov, who's considered one of the godfathers of Russian hockey. They started to dominate the international competitions and won 9 straight championships in the 60s. In response, Canada decided to build their own team. And instead, but because the best players were usually professional, and again, the national team couldn't do it, they did not win any championships at all, and were looked at as a failure because they weren't putting the best Canadian players on the ice.
Yes.
And then in 1969, the year after my mom was born, the government of Canada formed something called Hockey Canada, which oversees all of the hockey, basically anything hockey in Canada.
Hockey related.
Anything hockey related, from the kids to the adults.
Yeah. From schools all the way to professionals.
Basically, and it was also, to coordinate for international tournaments, scheduling between hockey players, and all that stuff.
What was the country's population at the time?
Oh, that I don't know.
Because that's a huge organization to.
Oh, totally. Hockey Canada, while they're embroiled in controversy right now, is still pretty freaking big. Let's not get into the controversy. Time is kind of gross.
All right.
So yeah, in 1969 they had formed Hockey Canada. So in July of that year, they just, to kind of ease things out, they did basically a trial. They sent a few professional players, to a tournament in Izvestia. I've never heard of that place. In 1969, and almost won. However, because the Canadians almost won with 5 professionals, the international hockey body then had an emergency meeting in 1970, and they pulled that. So after that, Canada refused to have anything to do with international hockey for 2 years. And that year, the World Championships were supposed to be in Canada for the first time. They were sent to Sweden because Canada refused. So what ended up happening was the Canadian embassy in Russia, they got word that the Russians wanted to play. They wanted to play a series against Canada. and so meetings were held, and so that's when they decided on 4 games in Canada, 4 games in Russia. And there were 2 games to be held in Sweden before the Moscow segment of the series as part of a celebration of the 50th anniversary of ice hockey in Sweden. So those games didn't count in the series, but they did play 2 games in the middle there. And Canada was, I think they also played in Czech Republic as well at some point. But anyways, yeah, so it was decided.
Most likely have been Czechoslovakia at that point, that time period.
Yeah, sorry, I was just happy to call it the Czech Republic. Or what's it called now? Czechia?
No, it's called, I believe it's still called Czech Republic. But
yeah, but there's also another name now.
Czechia is the correct word, but at that time it was still Czechoslovakia.
Yeah. What time did it split again?
1993.
Wow.
The year I was born. That's why I remember it.
Hey. Sorry. All right. So yeah, so in September of 72, the 2 sides agreed, and they would play the game under international rules. Now international rules are slightly different, and the NHL ice rinks are actually smaller than international hockey rinks, if you didn't know that. They're smaller width-wise, I think. Yeah, so Canada was like, okay, cool. They agreed to the terms under the belief that Canadians would have no difficulty winning under any of the conditions.
Or so they thought.
Yeah, or so they thought. The Soviets, it was felt that, they had asked for benefits that would only favor them, which actually, will play into as the series goes on. So obviously, and they were going to compensate the players. So the agreement stipulated that Soviet players were to be paid $5,000 per game in Canada, and Canadian players were to be paid 5,000 rubles per game in Moscow. It was also agreed that the choice of referees were acceptable to both parties. Yeah. So during the summer, they announced that the games would be in the Montreal Forum, where the Montreal Canadiens played. I mean, that arena was torn down years ago. Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto, the Winnipeg Arena in Winnipeg, and Vancouver's Pacific Coliseum. And then the games in Russia were all to be held in Moscow at the Luzhniki Ice Palace. Yes, that's the name of it, the Luzhniki. Yeah, so the NHL players didn't want to do it at first because of the September dates, because they wanted to play maybe a little bit later when they were in shape. Because let's put it this way, hockey athletes back then were nowhere near as good a shape as they are now. This is nothing compared.
The sport evolves.
The sport evolved, and so exactly. The sport evolved, and it's God. Like, they were great players, but my God, they would be so. I don't know if they would be outmatched nowadays. It'd be kind of fun to watch. All right. So along the way, NHL Players Union president and Hockey Canada director Alan Eagleson, who actually ended up going to jail for fraud for stealing money from all his clients in the 90s, and then he got his Hall of Fame induction taken away. His plaque is the only plaque to ever be removed from the Hall of Fame. So Eagleson, he actually, because of his stature at the time, was able to call on a personal network of players, owners, Hockey Canada executives in Canada business, and he was able to kind of sneak his way into the negotiations. So they end up getting former Bruins coach Harry Sinden, who had left hockey in 1970, the year the Bruins won the Stanley Cup. So they end up getting him. The Canadian team would be known as Team Canada for the first time. The name and sweater design was done by advertising Victor and Benson's. Eagleson wanted to call the team the NHL All-Stars. However, the agency convinced Eagleson that, Hockey Canada would be better. So, that's actually how Team Canada and the whole Canada brand was from this tournament. No numbers were on the sleeves, only on the back with the wording Canada above the number instead of the name. Like, if you've seen hockey jerseys, it's usually the name. Well, no, they decided to put Canada on the back. They were only red and white with the Maple Leaf number. Like, they were very, very simple. It was also referred to as the Friendship Series during the time. That was before the games actually started. Like I said, Canadians, they didn't really know much about Russians. They thought they were going to dominate the series.
Never underestimate your opponent.
This is a little excerpt from Wikipedia. At the time, the National Hockey League was considered to be where the best players played, and his best players consisted largely of Canadians. Still the case, but not as much. The public consensus of hockey pundits and fans in North America was that other countries, the Soviets in this case, were simply no match for Canada's best. The Soviets were not expected to even give the Canadians a challenge, and Canada was given into this series expected to win handily. Harry Sinden stated, Canada is first in the world in two things, hockey and wheat. Apparently, we were known for our wheat at the time. I don't know.
That's not something I would have associated with Canada.
There were hockey polls and magazines where basically no one expected the Soviets to even win one game. People thought there was going to be blowout. Before the first game, former Montreal Canadiens star goaltender and the first person to actually regularly wear a hockey mask on the ice after he broke his nose during a game, Jacques Plante, gave Soviet goaltender Vladislav Tretiak advice because he was thinking of the humiliation he was almost certain to suffer. So basically, nobody gave the Russians a chance at all.
No.
All right. So, again, what I'm going to be doing is they got nice breakdowns of the games on Wikipedia. So I'm going to use those because I actually haven't watched every game. That's a lot. All right. Game 1 was held in Montreal in a very warm Montreal Forum on September 2nd before 18,818 fans. The gamesmanship between the teams started before the opening puck drop. Canada was assigned the home team for all games in Canada, while the Soviets would be the home team in Moscow. The Soviets would not release their lineup until they had seen their opponents, which was the opposite order. Normally, it's the road team that gives the lineups first, and then the home team. The official scorer had to return to the Soviets' dressing room and demand the lineup. Harry Sinden wanted to put a certain line up against Vladimir Harlamov's line. However, Soviets didn't start with him, and so Sinden had to put out another line. They had to put out Phil Esposito, who is one of the stars, and we will definitely be hearing from him later. And that move paid off as Phil Esposito scored for Canada after just 30 seconds of hockey, knocking a puck out of the air behind Tretiak. But even after a few minutes, Harry Sinden felt the Soviets were coming on and having no difficulty getting through Canada's defense. Paul Henderson scored after 6 minutes to give Canada a 2-goal lead on a face-off win by Bobby Clark, the only advantage that Canada had in Harry Sinden's estimation. To the Canadian spectators and media, the second goal gave the appearance that the pre-series predictions of a rout were being given correct. But the Soviets got over any of the NHLers and scored twice to tie the game 2-2 before the end of the first period. Yevgeny Zimin scored on a pass from behind the net, and Vladimir Petrov scored a shorthanded goal on a Soviet 2-on-1 break, with Petrov potting the rebound and after an initial Dryden save. According to Harry Sinden, the Canadians had lost their poise, quote, running all over the ice, trying to establish their hitting game, while the Soviets used an unexpected tactic, the long pass, to break a man out of their defensive zone. The Canadian defense was also dropping to the ice to block shots, while the Soviets simply skated around them to get a closer shot. Although Vladislav Tretiak had given up 2 goals in Canada's first 2 shots, he recovered later in the period to make 2 crucial saves off Phil Esposito at point-blank range. According to Esposito, at Christmas time, it would have been 4-0 for us. In the second period, Valery Harlamov scored on a great individual rush to put the Soviets ahead 3-2. He deked Don Awrey of the Canadians, skated around him, faked a backhand shot on goaltender Ken Dryden, then scored on the forehand. Harlamov then scored a second goal to give the Soviets a 2-goal lead at the end of the second period. During that period, the air temperature in the Forum, which had no air conditioning system, increased. So by the end of the second period, the temperature in the Forum had reached 115 degrees Fahrenheit or 46 Celsius.
Oof.
It's pretty hot in a hockey arena.
Yeah, that's like a casual summer over here.
Yep. All right, for the third period, Harry Sinden benched Don Awrey and the Jean Rattel line, going with just 3 lines instead of 4. So in the third, Bobby Clark scored to bring Canada within 1 goal. And in Canada, the Canadians' attempt to tie the game, Ivan Cournoyer put a puck off the post, but the Soviets broke out afterwards, and Boris Mikhailov scored on a counterattack to restore their 2-goal lead with 6 minutes to play. Mikhailov skated across the Canadian net about 20 feet out, lured Ken Dryden away from the goal crease, then backhanded the puck between the goalie's legs into the net. The strategy of 3 lines combined with the heat in the arena had left the Canadians exhausted, and the Soviets scored twice in the final minutes to finish the game 7-3. Yeah.
In the Soviets' favor.
In the Soviets' favor. The second game was played at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto on my birthday, September 4th, 15 years before I was born.
It's the part that counts.
Yeah. So Harry Sinden, he scratched several players from the first game and then put in reserves. Let's see. Sorry. So Harry Sinnen said his changes to the lineup were made to get the diggers into the game and try to grind the Russians down. So basically, they were going to start playing Canadian hockey and gritty. They had went for speed and quick. We had went for speed and quickness on our first lineup. Yet the Russians were still faster and quicker. All right. So Team Canada, they responded to their previous defeat with stronger play. The first period, no score, but the Canadians used the period to intimidate the Soviets with hard body checking. The second period, Phil Esposito scored again the first goal of the game, this time from a feed from his regular Boston Bruins linemate Wayne Cashman, who had retrieved the puck deep in the Soviet zone after colliding with the Russian defenseman. In the third period, Yvon Cournoyer, who actually have his autograph, wheeled around Alexander Ragulin and beat Tretiak to give Canada a 2-0 lead. Russian player Yakushev, he got the Soviets on the board after his teammate missed a breakaway. And then Yuri Lapkin, I think is how you pronounce it. He pounced on a rebound afterwards and fed it off to Alexander Yakushev to bury the puck behind Esposito. Then Peter Mahovlich of the Canadians scored a critical shorthanded goal and to give Canada a 2-goal lead again. His brother Frank Mahovlich, who was a Hockey Hall of Famer, actually they're both Hockey Hall of Famers, then finished the scoring on a feed from Stan Mikita, who had circled around a Soviet defense. Team Canada's 4-1 win tied the series at 1 game apiece. The Soviet coaches blamed the loss on the officiating. Bobrov, the coach, complained that the pair of American referees let the Canadians get away with everything. After the game, the head of the USSR Hockey Federation, Andrei Starovoy, charged the door of the referees' dressing room, and he kicked chairs around. The two referees who were scheduled to work Game 4 in Vancouver were replaced by the pair who had refereed Games 1 and 3. Canada, just to keep the peace, they just agreed to the request. Apparently not aware of the tantrum that was thrown, though. Game 3 was played in Winnipeg on September 6th. So after the second game, the Soviets had said that they strayed into playing too much of the Canadian style as individuals and promised to return to their team style. Canada went with the same lineup as Game 2, with just one exception. They just swapped out Jean Rattel for Bill Goldsworthy. Team Canada held leads of 3-1 and 4-2, but the Soviets rallied and the game ended in a 4-4 tie, which makes the final game all the more crucial.
Yeah. So, recap. It's 1 win for the Soviets, 1 win for the Canadians, and a tie.
And this is going to be the tie, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is the tiebreaker.
Well, no. I'm just going to go over a little bit of Game 3, the little game that tied. Yeah. So Canada took the lead after only a minute 54 into the game by a goal from JP Parise. And then Russians replied shorthanded at 3:16 of the period, 3 minutes into the period to tie it. After a strong forecheck by the Canadians, they scored again to put it ahead 2-1 after the first. And in the second period, Wayne Cashman, the Canadians, dug the puck out of the corner to feed it to Phil Esposito, who put the Canadians ahead 3-1. However, on a Canadian power play, Harlamov circled behind the Canadian defense and gathered a breakaway pass. Then they beat goaltender Tony Esposito to score the Russians' second shorthanded goal of the series. Paul Henderson scored unassisted seconds later to give the Canadians again a 2-goal lead. However, the Soviets' quote-unquote youngsters line of Yuri Lebedev, Vyacheslav Anderson, and Alexander Bodanov, they scored twice to tie the game at 4-4 after 2 periods. Third period was scoreless, creating what would prove to be the only tie of the 8-game series. There was no provision for overtime. So Team Canada assistant coach John Ferguson felt that the Canadians had gone overconfident. Quote, I was fooled again. I felt that after we had taken a 3-1 lead, the final score might be something like 7-1. But those 2 shorthanded goals, when you score 1 shorthanded goal, it can turn it all around. But 2, that's almost fatal, which is actually true. According to Tim Burke of the Montreal Gazette, both goalies, Esposito and Tretiak, they reached great heights, or the outcome could have been worse. It could have been 10-10. So Tretiak was surprising everyone for the Soviets, who was planned to start another goalie, but he had gotten sick. But yeah, so now Game 4. Now this is where the emotions start to get up, and this is where going to be the first clip that will be played just for Game 4. God, I hate having a cold.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So the game 4 was played in Vancouver at the Pacific Coliseum. Like I said, it's still around, and I've been in it. I saw Guns N' Roses there. All right. The game started with 2 consecutive penalties by Canadian Bill Goldsworthy and Boris Mikhailov, captain of the team. No, he was captain in 80. Anyways, Boris Mikhailov converted both into power play goals to give the Soviets a 2-0 lead. Bill Goldsworthy was trying to counter his teammates' truculence, but only ended up hurting his team and was criticized by the coach in private. Understandable. In the second, Gilbert Perreault, who I think I'm distantly related to, scored when a Soviet deflected his shot past Tretiak. So basically he shot, and it was the Russian that accidentally put in the net. But the Russians scored less than a minute later to restore the 2-goal lead. Rod Gilbert of the Canadiens scored a questionable goal that was disallowed, and Canada's protests went unheeded. To Harry Sinden, that was the turning point of the game, and the result could have been different had that goal been allowed, although Sinden admitted it was a beating. The Russians scored to put the Soviets ahead 4-1 after 2 periods. In the third, Bill Goldsworthy made partial amends when he scored to make it 4-2, but then the Russians again scored to put the game away out of reach. Dennis Hall of the Canadiens scored a little too late in the final minute of the game. All the Canadiens' goals were scored by players Sinden had inserted in places of players who had played in Winnipeg. Still, Sinden felt that changing the lineup had been a mistake. According to Harry Sinden, Ken Dryden, who had replaced Tony Esposito in net, did not have a good game. He was shaky. And according to Conacher, I don't know where they mentioned him earlier, the Soviets used cross-ice passing in the attack zone, a tactic that caused problems for Dryden's because they don't. At that time, they hadn't seen hockey like that. Sorry?
I didn't say anything.
Oh, I thought you did. Sorry.
No, there was noise from outside. Sorry.
And now Team Canada was booed off the ice at the end of what was the final game of the series played in Canada. Responding to the negative public and media reaction in light of the expectation for an overwhelming Team Canada sweep of the series, Phil Esposito made an emotional outburst in a post-game interview that we will watch right now.
I can't hear anything.
Oddly enough, me neither. I thought I got the sound.
Okay, try again.
Yep. Weird.
Live TV, folks. Gotta hate it.
Yeah, what the heck? Normally this works. What's going on?
Probably should have downloaded it and made it a
Oh, come on.
relay in StreamYard.
This never happens.
What happened?
I don't know why the sound's not working. I don't know. Luckily, I can quickly download it, though.
So, what's the situation on the game at this point?
So that the game's over. Canada had lost. They had lost the game.
By how much?
Hold on a second. By. Oh, what was the final score? 4-2, 5-3 at the end.
Okay. So the Soviets won 2 games. Canadians won 1 game, and the other one was a tie.
Oh, this sucks, man. I really wanted to play the audio. But you know what? I've actually got a transcript right in front of me. To the people across Canada, we tried. We gave it our best. And to the people that boo us, geez, all of us guys are really disheartened and we're disillusioned and we're disappointed at some of the people. We cannot believe the bad press we've got, the booing we've gotten in our own buildings. If the Russians boo their players, the fans, Russian booed their players, some of the Canadian fans. I'm not saying all of them. Some of them booed us. Then I'll come back and I'll apologize to each one of the Canadians. But I don't think they will. I'm really disappointed. I am completely disappointed. I cannot believe it. Some of our guys are really, really down to the dumps. We know we're trying like hell. I mean, we're doing the best we can, and they got a good team. And let's face facts. But it doesn't mean that we're not giving it our 150% because we certainly are. I mean, every one of us, 35 guys that came out and played for Team Canada, we did it because we love our country and not for any other reason, no other reason. They can throw the money, for the pension fund out the window. They can throw anything they want out the window. We came because we love Canada. And even though we play in the United States and we earn money in the United States, Canada is still our home, and that's the only reason we come. And I don't think it's fair that we should be booed. After the fourth game, the series went on a 2-week hiatus, and the Soviets returned home and played in a domestic tournament. The Canadians took a few days off and traveled to Sweden for a pair of exhibition games before arriving in Moscow. Those were I had mentioned earlier. So Game 5. Canada arrived in Moscow for the final 4 games, accompanied by 3,000 Canadian fans. Not long after starting practices in Moscow, Team Canada players Vic Hatfield, Rick Martin, and Jocelyn Gouvernement left the team and went home for what they felt was a lack of playing time. Team Canada uses practice time in the Dvorets Sporta to learn the differences of the Soviet rinks. And while there had been concern about the wider ice surfaces, what was most strange to Canadian players was the fish netting draping at the end of the rink above the boards instead of glass. Considered in play, the netting was strung tight, and a slap shot to the netting could catapult the puck back as fast as the original shot, which I actually didn't know was a thing. Sorry. Game 5 was held on September 22nd. Luzhniki was filled to its 14,000 capacity, including Communist Party General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev, Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin, and Soviet head of state Nikolai Podgorny, and a large contingent of military in dress. The 3,000 Canadian fans were given seats, but a group of 150 Canadian sports figures were left unseated. The players marched out of the ring to the game to loud cheers, accompanied by the song "Coward Doesn't Play Hockey." Never heard the song. During the pregame introductions, Jean Ratelle, captain for the night, was given the traditional gift of bread. The players were all given red and white carnations. Phil Esposito was given flowers, and this is actually this is a hilarious Canadian moment, but he slipped and fell on the flower stem, landing on his back. Basically, he slipped on the ice. Esposito recovered to laugh at his pratfall and bowed to the light of all the spectators. So talk about an icebreaker, no?
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah. No, it's a funny moment. JP Parise scored the only goal of the first period, and Bobby Clark and Paul Henderson scored in the final second to give Canada a 3-0 lead. In the third, Yuri Blinov scored for the Russians at 3:34, and Paul Henderson scored at 4:56 to make it a 4-1 Canada lead. At 9:05, Anderson scored on a deflection to start a run of 4 straight Soviet goals. Vladimir Vikolov's goal at 14:46 was the game winner for the Russians, whose 5-4 victory gave them a 3-1 series lead. According to Bobby Clark, we're not a defensive club, yet we tried to play defensively. Despite the loss, all the Canadian fans in the arena sang "O Canada" as they left the ice. The cheering of the Canadian fans was unknown at Soviet hockey games. The Soviet newspaper Pravda noted wryly that the roof of the arena had withstood the loudness of the cheering and had remained in place. Team Canada now faced with the daunting task of having to win all 3 remaining games to win the series. To add the Canadian struggles, Gilbert Perreault left Canada for home to focus on getting into shape for the upcoming season. He had played in Game 5, practiced with the team the day after, and then left. Game 6. Game 6 produced a vital 3-2 Canada victory. After a scoreless first period, Lyapkin scored the first goal of the game at 1:12 of the second, but the Canadians' confidence did not waver. The Canadians caught the Soviets in a lapse and scored 3 goals in a minute and a half span to take a 3-1 lead. I love it when that happens, especially when it's your team. Dennis Hall flipped a rebound over Tretiak to tie the game after Rod Gilbert had scored on a Soviet giveaway. Yvon Cornwallier, the Roadrunner, scored on a setup from behind the net by Red Berenson. And 15 seconds later, Paul Henderson scored on what turned out to be the winning third goal on a 30-foot slap shot. Yakushev scored late in the second period on a power play to finish the scoring. According to Montreal Gazette sports editor Ted Blackman, Canadian players Ken Dryden and Brad Park turned in their first big games of the series. Dryden ended a personal losing streak to the Soviets dating back to his amateur career in 2 previous games in the series. Yeah, actually, this is one thing I forgot to head in. Going into the series, only one Canadian had actually played the Soviets, and that was Ken Dryden, one of the goalies.
Okay.
Who ended up becoming premier of Ontario at one point. Yeah. And a lot of great books on hockey, like really good book. I just listened to an audiobook 2 weeks ago that he wrote a couple years ago on the Summit series and his memories of it. Really good. Only 2-hour listen.
Cool.
Where to start? Sorry. According to commentator Brian Conacher, Team Canada had questioned had adjusted its game to not play quote unquote dump and chase, but rather retain possession in the offensive zone. The strategy led directly to Paul Henderson's winning goal. And according to Conacher, for the first time, the Soviets had opened the door crack and Team Canada had rushed through like a freight train. Following the game, the Canadians complained that Josef Kampala and Franz Botter, the German referees, the same who refereed a controversial Canada-Sweden game, were biased since Canada was assessed 31 minutes in penalties when the Soviets received only 4. Phil Esposito complained that one goal by the Soviets was directly the result of the referee dropping the puck when he was talking to a teammate. The Canadians gave the pair the nickname of Batter and Worse. The Slash. During Game 6, Valeri Harlamov was targeted by Team Canada for retention. According to Brian Conacher, every time they got a chance, they're taking him for a rough ride along the boards. Harlamov was the target of numerous body checks by Brad Park, and things started to heat up in the second period. Harlamov had knocked down Bobby Clark, who in retaliation rubbed Harlamov's face with his glove to raise Harlamov's temper. The two exchanged punches. Bergman then stepped in and bumped into Harlamov and harassed him all the way back to the bench. Peter Mahovlich later elbowed Harlamov, who retaliated by dumping Mahovlich to the ice. Later, Bobby Clark raced down the ice to catch a streaking Harlamov and deliberately slashed Harlamov's already sore ankle, injuring it, and according to reports, fracturing it. And that is the second video. This one is fine if we don't play with audio. Yeah. Really don't know why the sound's not transferring. Weird.
Soviets, the first goal of the game, and at 2:12, all the scoring in the second period. 3-1 for Canada as the puck goes back to Ragulin, number 5. They're 5 aside, both teams a man short. Soviet moves to the attack at center ice. Harlamov passes back. Here's the roller in front, a shot knocked down by Berglund, who fell in.
Did you see the slash?
No, I saw someone falling.
Yep. Okay, I'll rewind and I'll show it for you.
You can slow it down, right?
Soviet moves to the attack.
Nope. How do you do that? Oh, there it is. Nope. That's watch later.
No. Go to the cog with the settings. No, then settings.
Oh, sorry. Oh.
Playback speed.
Okay, we'll go back at half. Okay, so this is Bobby Clark. That's Harlamov.
Okay.
Back at center ice. Harlamov pass back. Here's the roller in front.
Okay.
Both teams a
I'll
man
put it up.
short.
So here comes Harlamov.
Soviet
Middle.
moves to the attack at center ice.
And
Harlamov
he gives it
pass back.
It's on.
Roller in front, a shot. Knocked down by Berglund, who fell in front of it.
Whoa.
And there's going to be a penalty, I believe, on this one. Here's a mix-up. As the Soviet player shoved a bit, now Berglund goes over to the Soviet player. Puts
All right, break it up.
Harlamov and Berglund. Well, that nearly started something. They don't.
And yes, they didn't always play with helmets.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that.
Sorry.
So the slash was right when the two of them
Yeah, but right
off screen, or right before the referee stopped it.
A few moments before the referee stopped play.
Okay.
Harlamov skated over to Canada's bench and yelled at them before limping off the ice to the dressing room. The referees handed Bobby Clarke a minor penalty for slashing and an additional 10-minute misconduct penalty. Later, with Bobby Clarke still serving the misconduct, the referees also gave Dennis Hall a slashing penalty during which Yakushev scored. Despite his injured ankle, Harlamov returned to play and very nearly scored on a power play later in the second period. Boris Mikhailov exalted his own retribution, kicking Bergman hard enough to cut his leg through his shin pads. The incident was widely reported and condemned by the Soviet press. Harlamov himself believed that Bobby Clarke was given the job of taking me out of the game. The slash was apparently done at the instigation of assistant coach John Ferguson. I remember that Harlamov's ankle was hurting pretty bad. I called Clarke over to the bench, looked over at Harlamov and said, I think he needs a tap on the ankle. I didn't think twice about it. It was us versus them, and Harlamov was killing us. I mean, somebody had to do it. Dick Beddoes asked Bobby Clarke about it later at a team reunion, calling it a wicked two-hander, to which Bobby Clarke replied, Dick, if I hadn't learned how to lay on a two-hander once in a while, I never would have left Flin Flon, Manitoba. On the 30th anniversary of the series, Paul Henderson called the incident the lowest point of the series, but would later apologize to Bobby Clarke. In his 2007 book, Brian Conacher wrote that from the broadcast booth, I was shocked and disgusted when I saw Clarke viciously chop at Harlamov's left ankle. He noted that emotionally, these games had clearly gone beyond sport for Team Canada and had truly become unrestricted war on ice. The media opinion is divided on the effect it had on the outcome of the series. The controversy and the omissions that have come forth throughout the years have led some to the belief that the incident could be considered a form of cheating. Harlamov, who had been one of the Soviets' best players, missed Game 7 when the Soviets would have clinched the series, and while he did play in Game 8, he was not at 100% and did not score. In Clarke's opinion, there were other factors for Team Canada's turnaround in Moscow. In Moscow, we played much better than in Canada. We were almost equal to the Soviet team physically by then. We passed much better. We shot the puck much better. We became faster and played better on defense. Besides, when you have nothing to lose, it is easier to play. And after the fifth game, we had nothing to lose. All right. Game 7 was won by Canada with a 4-3 score to even the series at 3-3-1. In the first period, Phil Esposito scored 2 goals, while Yakushev and Petrov tallied for the USSR, ending the first period tied 2-2. The second period was scoreless, and in the third, Rod Gilbert put Canada ahead, but Yakushev scored again to tie the game 3-3. At 7:54, Henderson fooled Soviet defender Sigankov with a pass through the Soviets' feet, and then skated around him to pick up the puck and break in on Tretiak. As Henderson shot and scored, Valery Vasilev tripped Henderson, who did not see his shot go in. The goal light went on and off quickly, and Team Canada rushed onto the ice to congratulate Henderson before there was any doubt raised about the goal. The Soviet coach Bobrov publicly blamed the loss on Stigankov. After the game, Paul Henderson commented that about the goal as the one that gave him his most personal satisfaction ever. The game also featured another controversial incident. At 16:26 of the third period, a scuffle broke out between Canada's Bergman and the USSR's Mikhailov, in which Mikhailov kicked Bergman twice. Czech referee Rudolf Batia and Swedish referee Ove Dahlberg officiated the game, and it was announced that the German referee pair of Josef Kampala and Franz Botter had been sent home, and Batia and Dahlberg would referee the final game in exchange for a promise that Bergman would not publicly berate Bobrov. Now on to the so fun Game 8, because this is like where everything comes to a head. This is where the war. This is no man's land time.
This is the Quidditch World Cup.
Basically, this is it. All right. Oh, sorry. Controversy ensued when the Soviets wanted to back out of the refereeing agreement. The Soviets wanted to include the German pair of referees originally scheduled for the game. Alan Eagleson threatened to pull Team Canada from playing the 8th. So in a compromise, Kampala refereed along with Botta instead of Batter. The ill will spilled over into the presentation of a totem pole as a gift from Canada. The pre-game presentation was canceled by the Soviets, but restored on the insistence of Team Canada. According to Harry Sinden, Eagleson stated that they were going to take this totem pole and bring it to center ice, and will have to take it or skate around it the whole game. Heading into the 8th and final game, each team had won 3 times, lost 3 times, and tied once, but the Soviets were 2 goals ahead on goal differential. In Canada, much of the country enjoyed an unofficial half-a-day holiday, with many students in Toronto being sent home the afternoon of the game, which began at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, while many others watched the game at work or school. In Montreal's Central Station, 5,000 fans gathered around 10 TV sets to watch the game, which was simulcast in English on the CBC network, CTV network, and in French on the TV Radio Canada TV network. Until the men's hockey gold medal game at the 2010 Winter Olympics, it was the most watched sporting event in the history of Canadian television. Like I told you, big fucking deal here.
Yeah.
Team Canada took a number of questionable early penalties with two Canadians, White and Paul Mahovlich, off. Yakushev scored to give the Soviets the lead 1-0. The game was delayed after a mistaken call against Parise. He was called for interference, but Parise later admitted he was guilty of cross-checking, and emotions boiled over. JP Parise was called for misconduct for banging his stick on the ice, and when he saw the misconduct called, he dashed across the ice with his stick raised. Parise nearly swung his stick at Kampala and got a match penalty. Sinden threw a chair on the ice. Some writers have commented that the incidents resulted in the rest of the game being refereed capably. No joke. Like, I've watched there's a great miniseries on it called Canada Russia 72, done documentary style. And basically, yeah, the dialogue they admitted, basically, we did that to scare the shit out of them, like, just to tell them, you keep doing this, we're going to fucking kill you. And he refereed the game straight after that. There was also some slap shots that were shot his way, too, to make sure. But, yeah, he was definitely well-behaved after that.
Good.
After JP Parise's penalty was served, it was Canada's turn to go on the power play, and Phil Esposito scored his sixth goal of the series to tie it 1-1. The teams exchanged power plays before Luchenko scored a power play goal on a slap shot to put the Soviets ahead 2-1. Brad Park then scored his only goal of the series at even strength to complete some pretty passing between Dennis Hull and the Rangers teammates of Jean Rattel, Rod Gilbert, and Brad Park to tie the score. The period ended with the series tied, or the teams tied 2-2. In the second period, the Soviets started with a quick goal by Vladimir Shadrin after 21 seconds. Actually, what's pretty funny is, you remember a while back I did the episode on the Screech Owls?
Yeah.
So one player on the Screech Owls team and his cousin, who we meet in another book, they are fictional relatives of two of the players on this team, on the Soviet team.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
So I wanted to mention that there was a connection to a previous episode. The last 10 minutes of the second saw two goals from the Soviets. Yakushev scoring his seventh of the series, followed by Valery Vasilyev on the power play to put the Soviets ahead 5-3 after two periods. White had countered for Canada midway through the period. It was one of the few moments for Canada to cheer as the Soviets played an exceptional period. The other was a goal-saving play by Phil Esposito, who stopped a shot by Yuri Blinov, who had faked goaltender Dryden out of position and had an empty net to shoot at. Esposito stopped the puck with his stick on the goal line. Blinov and the crowd were prematurely celebrating the apparent goal, and Blinov shook his head in disbelief. Harry Sinden told the players to try to get one back quickly, but play tight defensively and not allow the game to get out of hand. Don't gamble until about the halfway point if need be. Esposito scored to put the Canadians within one. The tension rose at the rink, and extra soldiers were dispatched for security. It was matched on the ice as Rod Gilbert and Yevgeny Mishakov had a fight. Veteran Canadian hockey commentator Foster Hewitt noticed that you can feel the tension almost everywhere. At the 10-minute mark, Harry Sinden noticed that the Soviets had changed their style, playing defensively to protect the lead rather than pressing like they had earlier. However, the strategy backfired on the Soviets. The change in tactics gave the Canadians more chances to score, and Yvan Cournoyer scored to tie the game 5-5. After the Cournoyer goal, however, the goal judge refused to put the goal light on, despite the fact that it was signaled a goal on the ice. So in response, Alan Eagleson, seated across the ice from the Team Canada bench, attempted to reach the Timers bench to protest, causing a ruckus in the crowd as he made his way there. As he was being subdued by the Soviet police, the Canadian players headed over, and Peter Mahovlich jumped over the boards to confront the police with his stick. Eagleson was freed and escorted by the coaches across the ice to the bench. In anger, he shoved his fist into the Soviet crowd as a few other Canadians supported also gave the finger to the Soviets. The Soviets continued to play defensively. Now, this is actually the third clip I want to play you, is this incident. And sure, here we go. Why is there no audio again?
Backhander.
There it is.
Now we see a fight breaking out on the board. Mixed up on the far side, the Canadian team are mixing it up with the spectators, and I believe Alan Eagleson is in on it over there as far as we can tell. And the Canadian team are all over there. When that rumpus started, whatever it was, nobody knows. But Canada tied that score at 12:56, and it appeared to be Cornwallis who got the goal. There's a wild scramble around the Soap net. Apparently, the police were trying to throw Eagleson out, and that's when the reserves from the Canadian team came over there to help out. So that scoring play will likely be Cornwallis from Esposito.
Are they just walking on the ice?
Yep.
Ow.
Sorry. When you're Canadian, you learn how to walk on the ice from an early age.
All right, fine.
All right. So now we are at the end. We are at the goal. In the final minute of play, with Phil Esposito, Alvon Cornwallis, and Peter Mahovlich out on the ice, Paul Henderson stood up at the bench and called Mahovlich off the ice as he was skating by. I jumped on the ice and rushed straight for their net. I had this strange feeling that I could score the winning goal, recalls Paul Henderson. Bobby Clark was supposed to replace Esposito, but Phil did not come off. There was no way I was coming off the ice in that situation, Esposito had said. Cornwallis picked up a puck that had been passed around the boards by the Soviets in a clearing attempt. He missed Henderson with the pass, but two Soviets mishandled the puck in the corner, and Esposito shot the puck on Tretiak. Henderson, who had fallen behind the net, got up and went to the front of the net where he was uncovered. Henderson got the rebound off of Esposito's shot the puck, and was stopped, but recovered the rebound. With Vladislav Tretiak down, he put the puck past the goalie with only 34 seconds to play. Now I'm going to play the clip, or as we call it here, the goal.
Key one. Canadian team went into a huddle there, which seemed to be a little unusual. So they're really fighting. The puck comes up at center ice. Vasiliev carries it back into his zone to Shadron, who missed it. Peter Mahovlich is at center, driving it into the Soviet zone. Liapkin gets there first. Cornwallis just touched it, not all. Savard getting it at center ice, clearing it off a skate. It goes into the Canadian zone. Yakushev, a dangerous player, is belted on that play. Cornwallis rolled it out. Vasiliev going back to get it. 1:02 left in the game. Cleared pass on the far side. Liapkin rolled one to Savard. Savard cleared the pass to Stapleton. He cleared to the open wing to Cornwallis. Cornwallis took a shot. The defenseman fell over, Liapkin. And the Cornwallis has it on that wing. Here's a shot. Henderson made a wild stab for it and fell. Here's another shot. Right by the door. Henderson has scored for Canada. Henderson right in front of the net. And the players of the team are
Going crazy.
Henderson right in front of the Soviet goal with 34 seconds left in the game. An absolute mob scene over Paul Henderson, as there should be, but you can't underrate the effort again of Phil Esposito. He gets the puck, he fights for it, he gets it back in front of the net, but it's Paul Henderson's part there. He bangs at it, and he beats Tretiak cleanly with an
All right. So yeah, that is, like I said, it's known as the goal here. It is. It's probably the most iconic Canadian moment in history. Definitely the most iconic sports moment.
All right.
You can see it on coins. You see it everywhere. The scene was captured on film by cameraman Frank Lennon. The picture became iconic in Canada. Canada held on to win the game and the series 4-3 with one tie. Pat Stapleton picked up the puck for a keepsake back in the game. Somewhat overshadowed by Henderson's winning goal was a 4-point game by Phil Esposito, who tallied 2 goals and 2 assists and had a hand in all 3 goals in the third period. Phil Esposito was the only player on either team to score 4 points in the game during the series. According to Ron Ellis, he had, quote, never seen another player have a period where there was so much pressure and was still able to accomplish what he did, unquote. Harry Sinden considered it to be Esposito's finest hour. Esposito described it as there was no stopping me, and I think some of the guys got a little angry with me. If we had lost, I would have been the GOAT, but we didn't lose. I just had enough faith in myself that I was going to get it done one way or another. The series ended with no ceremony. After a brief on-ice gathering of Canadian players and team officials, the opposing teams shook hands and skated off the ice. There was no trophy or prize money at stake, and the players received no medals, not even a commemorative token. Team Canada arrived back home on October 1st. The team was mobbed by an estimated crowd of 10,000 at Montreal's Dorval Airport. After also greeting the team was Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau and City of Montreal Mayor Jean Drapeau. Montrealers Ken Dryden, Serge Savard, Yvon Cournoyer, Jean Rattel, and coach John Ferguson stayed in Montreal while the rest of the team traveled on to Toronto. And in Toronto, an estimated crowd of 80,000 attended a ceremony at Nathan Phillips Square to salute the players. The players were received by Ontario Premier Bill Davis and Toronto Mayor William Dennison. After it was reported that NHL President Clarence Campbell, recognize that name, and Chicago Blackhawks owner Bill Wirtz had concluded an agreement with the Soviets for the Soviet national team to play an exhibition series in January 1973 against the Bruins, Boston Bruins, New York Rangers, and Chicago Blackhawks. Campbell characterized the reports as presumptuous. The NHL and the Soviets had held talks during the Moscow games, during which the Soviets had requested further games, but Campbell stated, "We don't even know if we would schedule such a series, and we're a long way from that arrangement." Although the 1973 exhibition series did not take place, exhibition series would take place a few years later. Hold on, and now the legacy. While Canada won the series, the Soviets earned the respect of fans and players alike. The Canadians went from scoffing at their antiquated equipment and strange training methods and practices to admiration for their talent and conditioning. Frank Mahovlich said, "Give the Russians a football, American football, and they'd win the Super Bowl in 2 years." Many Soviet citizens believed that the outcome may have been different if Anatoly Firsov and Vitaly Davidov had not sat out the series to protest a coaching change. In response, some offered that Canada was without Bobby or Bobby Hall, or due to knee troubles, and Bobby Hall due to the exclusion of Canadians playing in the Western Hockey Association. These were arguably the best Canadian players at the time, along with Phil Esposito, so neither team had all of its greatest talent on the ice. The Soviet team had an obvious advantage of playing together year-round, however. But meanwhile, the Canadian team was picked and prepared in only a few weeks, and most players were not yet in shape during the series began. At the time, the NHL players did not regularly train during the summer months, using the period for holiday or other activities. According to IIHF hockey historians, the Summit Series convinced Canadians that ice hockey was now a global game and that any of the top nations teams in the world could win the Olympic or World Championship titles. The Swedish national team coach, Barry Harris, who himself was a former NHL player, later recalled that the Swedish media would ask me, "Do you see even one Swedish player who could possibly have a chance in the American Hockey League?" I answered, "No, I see 14 of them." The success of the Summit Series led to the NHL to organize further exhibitions against Soviet clubs, such as the 1975-76 Super Series 76. This was followed by the inaugural Canada Cup best-on-best tournament hockey. But the Super Series 1976, if I'm not mistaken, was the Russians touring North America to play against teams from the NHL. So it was basically like what was proposed earlier. In North America, the series, particularly the first few games, exposed the need for better preparation and off-season training. Flyers coach Fred Shero became an avid student of the Soviet style and was one of the first to bring the Soviet training techniques to the NHL, as the Flyers won 2 Stanley Cup championships in 1974 and 1975. Tom Melnor, who joined a small but rapidly growing group of American-born NHL players after the 72 Olympics, lamented that the NHL training methods of the early 70s were vastly inferior to those of the Soviets. When I went to play for Detroit after the Olympics, Alex Del Vecchio was the coach, and when he would coach, we would do a couple of one-on-ones, 2-on-2s, 3-on-3s, we'd scrimmage, and we would scrimmage, and he would scrimmage with us. At the end of the scrimmage, we do a couple of figure eights and then go to the bar. That was the NHL and pro mentality. Mark Howe, who is son of legendary NHLer Gordie Howe, commented that the Soviet national team must have trained 6 hours on the day of a game in the 1972 Winter Olympics. On the other hand, Swedish sport journalists were extremely impressed by the toughness and never-say-die fighting spirit of the Canadians, who lost only 1 game out of 7 on European ice, despite only trailing in the third period. According to Soviet player Boris Mikhailov, who himself later became a coach, it was a meeting of 2 schools of hockey, and we have since continued this great exchange, and we have learned from each other, taking the best of both styles. As time passed, the significance of the series grew in the public consciousness, and the term Summit Series became its unofficial accepted name. In Canada, the Summit Series is a source of national pride and is seen by many as a landmark event in Canadian cultural history. And in Canada, Paul Henderson's goal is considered to be the most famous in the history of the game and can be simply referred to as the goal. The series is also seen by many Canadians as an important win in the Cold War. So yeah, that's the legacy, and there's been documentaries and, like I said, miniseries and whatnot. It's been featured in Canadian coins. Like I said, most people, I'm assuming, before a certain young age, will know what that is just by looking at this image. Like, that's how iconic it is. Almost everyone in Canada knows this.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's it for the 1972 Summit Series. Any questions? I feel like I talked a lot.
Yeah, but I mean, that's why we love you.
Well, I was waiting for you to interrupt me.
No, I was listening.
Okay, but yeah, no. If you have any questions, or if you want to have any thoughts or whatever, what have you.
No.
Well, okay then. So 50. What is the topic for next week?
My topic for next week is all about Dominic Toretto's favorite thing in the world. Do you know what that is?
Family or cars? One of the two.
Family.
So we're going to talk about your family?
No. We are going to talk about a family, one family in specific, a family that is widely considered arguably the most famous and well-known families in modern-day Israel, the Banai family.
Okay.
Family that almost every single member of the family, at least in the last generation and a half, is well known. We're talking a family of famous actors, singers, comedians,
Wow.
politicians, public relation people, like a family where at least well over 20 people are famous and well known positively for a variety of different fields. So
cool.
We're going to have some interesting time breaking down all the different family members from their inception to their rise to fame in the Israeli public consciousness. Like you mentioned the Banai surname. Let's just say that if you are from that you carry the Banai family name, it opens a lot of doors for you.
Wow.
Over here on this side of the world. So yeah, we got some family members to break down.
Interesting. Well, that's gonna be a fun episode. All right. Well, where can everybody find you?
You can find me on my YouTube channel, 50 Shades of Geek, where I do weekly reviews of every single Doctor Who episode from 1963 all the way to 2022. And you can also find me on this channel every Thursday doing this show, Fun with Flags, and every Monday on The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, where I talk even more Doctor Who. And you can also find me on wherever the hell Jordan's channel is. I did a almost 3-hour video with this guy talking about his favorite movies, and on the
network.
Yeah, Big Hero, and on the No Pause network with Frenchie, where we do Pokemon fusions, and it's really, really fun, and we just have so much fun doing it. So yeah, go ahead and check that one out.
Yes.
Oh, and I guess we're doing this now. So, and you can also check out all
the one that does this part. So,
all right. Okay, and you can also check out all the other channels on the wider Benverse at large, like Something to Talk About, Galaxy Geeks, Multiverse of Geekdom, Movie Lovers Unite, The Midnight Cinema, 8-Time Reviews, In the Front Row, and So Taken Wrestling, which I'm pretty sure Soda's going to do it right now. Plug that one right now.
Yes, I am. So yeah, you can find me on my personal Instagram and Twitter at soda_the_Saxman. You can find me on this channel, like 50 Cent. You can also find me over the So Dagan Wrestling Network, or whenever me and my buddy Dagan are available, we will just do a Monday show talking about what happened in wrestling recently, and I assume we're going to be doing one on this Monday, where we'll be discussing the unfortunate passing of Terry Funk, which was expected to be 79, and the truly unfortunate passing of Wyndham Rotunda, known to everyone as Bray Wyatt, at the age of 36, which is I'm turning in just about a week here. So it's interesting. So definitely go follow us over there. All right. So on behalf of myself and 50, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week. And guys, don't forget, in that time, don't forget to let your geek flag fly for this man. All right, folks. Have a good week.